Well, the National Legal and Policy Center, or the NLPC, is calling on Tony Blinken, the former managing director of the Penn Biden Center for Diplomacy and Global Engagement, to explain millions of dollars in anonymous Chinese funding. The NLPC says that the funding could present a national security risk should Joe Biden be elected as president. And with more on this, we want to bring in One America's John Hines live from Capitol Hill. Good morning, John. Good to see you. And because we won't be seeing each other for the rest of the week, happy Thanksgiving. So what can you tell us about this complaint from the National Legal and Policy Center?
Well, good morning, Lily. Good morning, and happy Thanksgiving to you. I noticed that you're wearing orange today, a color of the season, Thanksgiving, to get into Thanksgiving spirit. So my compliments to you, and I hope that you enjoy the holiday, and hopefully we'll see you on the other side of it. This is very interesting because what's happening here is the National Legal and Policy Center, as you mentioned in your introduction, they are asking for disclosures. This fellow, Tony Blinken, who has been mentioned possibly to be nominated as Secretary of State should Mr. Biden win this election, was the managing director of something called the Penn Biden Center. That is the University of Pennsylvania sponsoring this policy center. It's actually based in Washington, D.C., although the University of Pennsylvania is located in Philadelphia. And it's a policy shop, and it's raised an awful lot of money from Chinese sources of funding, including about $22 million that is still anonymous. Currently, laws require institutions, nonprofit institutions, to disclose from where these contributions emanate. That hasn't happened so far. And of course, Mr. Blinken was managing director of the Penn Biden Center, so it seems like he would have known, perhaps, or certainly would bear some of the responsibility for following the law. So we caught up with Paul Kamenar. He is the chief legal counsel of the National Legal and Policy Center, and he explains a little bit about what we're talking about, a little bit about why they feel like this could be a national security issue. And maybe we can hear that soundbite from Mr. Kamenar if it's ready to go.
Is this a potential conflict of interest, do you think, where you have someone who is heading up the Biden Center, the Penn Biden Center, is now possibly, could be, a Secretary of State in possibly an incoming administration if Mr. Biden actually wins this election?
Well, it may be a conflict of interest, but it's more importantly a national security problem. If in fact he has been receiving this China money at the Biden Center, and indeed we even...
How much China money are we talking about?
Well, like I said, there's about $70 million altogether that was given to the University of Pennsylvania since 2017. 22 million of that simply says China, and the source says anonymous. So we don't know who in China is giving that money. But here's the other complaint that the national...
So that's about a third of the money since 2017 has come from China.
Is anonymous. No, it's all $70 million from China.
$70 million from China overall.
And about a third of it is anonymous.
Right. So there you have it. That is the senior legal counsel at the National Legal and Policy Center, Paul Kamenar, talking about ethics and even potentially national security concerns, conflicts of interest involving Mr. Tony Blinken, who is managing director of that Penn Biden Center, managing director there for a couple of years, particularly with regard to concerns of national security regarding the Chinese. Some of those contributions going to the Penn Biden Center, some of them anonymous, much of it from China, raising all kinds of questions about the potential conflicts of interest, I guess you could say, with regard to someone who may serve in a diplomatic post should Mr. Biden be elected.
Well, John, it is pretty alarming that you would have no record for $22 million in such a short amount of time there. What has been the approach of the Biden Center toward China? Has it been at all critical of Chinese policies? And also, I seem to recall that we discussed a while ago that the NLPC had asked for a DOJ investigation into the Biden Center. What has happened since?
Well, Lily, I guess it would surprise no one perhaps to know or to learn that the Penn Biden Center has been something of a China cheerleader, for lack of a better term, sponsoring as recently as a year ago a symposium on China where they invited many Chinese nationals, including the top Chinese diplomat from the United Nations, sort of espousing or touting, I suppose you could say, Chinese policies in a whole range of areas at that symposium. Also, they have been very quiet with regard to the origins of the COVID-19 virus. Many people, most people I guess, acknowledge that began in China, emanated from that area there, likely a research facility. We don't know for sure because the Chinese have not allowed any kind of inquiry. So a lot of people have suggested that's where the flu came from. Penn Biden Center has been very quiet on that. They've also been very critical of some of our allies in Europe at apparently the behest of the Chinese policy, coincidentally perhaps, it seems to parallel in some ways what the Penn Biden Center says and does. So that seems to be perhaps coincidental, but on the other hand, they seem to have gotten an awful lot of money from China, so maybe it isn't quite so coincidental. And you're right, there was a complaint with the Department of Justice lodged by the National Legal and Policy Center, the NLPC, and we did discuss that, violation of the FARA, that's the Foreign Agent Registration Act. So any entity, including some of these nonprofit entities, acting in a relationship with a foreign national, a foreign country like China, are required by law to register as a foreign agent. And so they brought that up and said, hey, this center, this organization is effectively, in many ways, acting like an agent for the Chinese, for Chinese interests in America with regard to their policy platforms and their pronouncements with regard to policy between the United States and China. So a lot of questions being raised about the Penn Biden Center, and now with respect to FARA, that Foreign Agent Registration Act, and the money that has supported this institution, a lot of it coming from China, a significant amount of it, a third possibly, which is anonymous, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. And then of course Tony Blinken, whose name pops up, a connection potentially with being a Secretary of State, was managing director of the Penn Biden Center. So National Legal Policy Center raising a lot of questions about perhaps the national security implications here and ethics questions as well. Lily?
You're right, John. It does raise a lot of questions. Certainly seems to raise some ethical questions possibly, and also mismanagement on their part. It looks like we could be hearing more about this in the future. I'm sure you'll bring us the latest. But thank you again for that report, John, and happy Thanksgiving.